He said it on a Tuesday, which somehow made it worse. Not a Friday when the week was already broken. Not a Sunday when people were already bracing for Monday, a Tuesday. Evelyn Marshcroft, 37 years old, senior trust administrator at Glen Hollow Capital, had been standing in the front hallway of the house she had helped pay for, holding a mug of coffee that had gone cold while she waited for her husband to finish a phone call he did not want her to hear. The call ended. He came down the stairs, and Donovan Croft, 43 years old, co-owner of Croft and Alder Property Group, told his wife of 11 years that he wanted her gone by the end of the week. His mother was already there. Genevieve Croft, 68 years old, trustee of the Croft family estate, and the kind of woman who scheduled grief, stood near the kitchen doorway in an ivory blazer she had clearly worn specifically for this occasion. She was not surprised. She had been waiting for those words the way a person waits for a flight that has already been confirmed. She did not look at Evelyn with cruelty exactly. She looked at her the way people look at furniture they had never liked, but had agreed to live with for a long time. "You knew this wasn't working," Donovan said. He had prepared this. Evelyn could tell because he had phrasing. People who are speaking from the heart do not have phrasing. "We've been going through the motions for years. You must have felt it." Evelyn set the mug down on the console table by the door. She had brought that table from her apartment when they moved in together. She had not thought about that in a long time. "Who is she?" Evelyn said. It was not really a question. Donovan looked at Genevieve. Genevieve looked at the floor. "That is not what this is about," he said. But it was what it was about. Evelyn had known for approximately 4 months. She had known the morning she found a receipt for a necklace she had never received, tucked into the breast pocket of a jacket she had taken out of the dry cleaning bag before he could get to it. She had not said anything then. She had folded the receipt very neatly, put it in the drawer of her nightstand, and gone to make breakfast. She was not sure why. Maybe she had needed to be certain. Maybe she had needed time to figure out what being certain would mean for her life. She had used the time well, it turned out. "I'll need the week," she said. "Of course," Genevieve said, with a warmth that was not warmth at all, just the shape of it. "Take whatever time you need, dear." Evelyn picked up the coffee mug again, went to the kitchen, poured it out, rinsed the mug, set it in the drying rack. She could feel both of them watching her from the hallway, unsure what to do with her composure. That was fine. Let them be unsure. She went upstairs and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her hands for a long time. She was not devastated in the way she thought she would be. She had imagined this moment sometimes, lying awake next to Donovan while he slept, listening to the particular silence of a house that had stopped being a home. And in those imaginings she had always cried, or gone cold, or felt the floor drop out from under her. Instead she felt something more like the quiet that comes after a very long noise finally stops. Something had been resolved, even if what had been resolved was terrible. She thought about her father, who had built the original Glen Hollow investment fund with 32 clients and a rented office above a dental practice in Oakville. He had died 9 years ago and left everything, the fund, the administrative trust, and a controlling interest in the capital group that had since grown to manage assets for over 400 private and corporate clients, to Evelyn, because she was the only person he trusted to understand what he had actually built. Not the money, the responsibility. She had never talked about it much. It had not seemed like something to talk about. Donovan knew she worked in trust administration. He had attended her father's funeral. He had nodded a great many times during a great many conversations about fiduciary obligations and portfolio reviews. Whether he had ever actually listened was, she now suspected, a question she should have asked earlier. She opened her laptop. She pulled up the Glen Hollow Capital Client Directory and searched for Croft and Alder Property Group. The account was there. It had been there for 6 years, since before she and Donovan had married, since her father had approved the initial application, and she had inherited the file along with everything else. She had recused herself from active management of that account when they got engaged, handed it to a senior colleague, disclosed the relationship in writing, followed every protocol exactly. She had been careful. She had been perhaps more careful about her professional responsibilities than she had been about her own marriage. The outstanding loan balance on Croft and Alder's primary commercial line of credit was just over $4.3 million. The collateral, a portfolio of properties in the Niagara region that Donovan and his partner Alder had been quietly overvaluing for 3 years, was, if her colleague's most recent private assessment was accurate, worth considerably less than that. The review that Glen Hollow Capital had been quietly preparing for the past 8 weeks, triggered by anomalies in Croft and Alder's quarterly reporting, was scheduled to conclude at the end of the month. Evelyn closed the laptop. She had not done anything with that information. She had not needed to. The review was happening because it needed to happen, because the numbers had stopped making sense, and that was not something a trust institution could simply ignore. Her personal situation had nothing to do with it. That was the thing about fiduciary responsibility. It did not take your feelings into account. It just applied. She started packing. She took the things that were hers. The table by the door she left, because she did not have anywhere to put it yet, and because she did not want to have a conversation about the table. She took her books, her files, her mother's jewelry box, the framed photograph from her father's office that had always sat on her desk, a man standing in front of a small glass building with his hand shading his eyes against the sun. She took the winter coat she had bought in Scotland, and the coffee grinder she had owned since university, and the set of copper pots her colleague had given her as a wedding gift. She left the rest. On Thursday evening, a woman named Petra arrived to help Donovan bring boxes up from what had apparently been a storage locker. Evelyn saw her through the bedroom window, late 30s, dark hair, wearing a necklace Evelyn did not recognize but somehow felt she should. The woman moved through the front path with the particular ease of someone who had been imagining living there for quite some time. Evelyn watched her for a moment. Then she went back to folding sweaters. She had dinner that night with her friend Agnes, who had known her since the first year of university and who had also, as it happened, never particularly liked Donovan Croft. "He genuinely doesn't know," Agnes said over wine in Agnes's kitchen in the annex. "About Glen Hollow. About your father's fund. He has no idea. He knows I work in trust administration. That's different from knowing what you actually control." "Yes," Evelyn said, "it is." Agnes looked at her for a long moment. "Are you going to be all right?" Evelyn thought about the question. Not about what the right answer was, or what Agnes needed to hear. She actually thought about it. "I think," she said slowly, "that I am going to be fine. It's going to take a while to feel like the right shape again, but I think I'll be fine." She moved into a furnished apartment in Rosedale on Friday, which was a nicer neighborhood than she had told herself she could justify. But she was 37, and she had been through a great many things, and she decided she was allowed. The apartment had tall windows and old oak floors, and a small balcony overlooking a garden that would be very beautiful in spring. She made coffee in her own coffee grinder and sat at the kitchen table and began her new life, which looked a great deal like her old life, except that she was not waiting to hear a phone call she was not supposed to hear. She called the office on Monday and returned to work on Tuesday. Her colleague in charge of the Croft and Alder review, a meticulous man named Gerard, who had been with Glen Hollow for 21 years, updated her on the status. The review had surfaced what he politely called significant irregularities. The collateral portfolio had been reassessed. The gap between the declared values and the actual assessed values was substantial, and not, in his professional opinion, accidental. "It's not my file," Evelyn said. "I recused when we got engaged. You don't need my input." "I know," Gerard said. "I'm telling you as a courtesy, because the outcome is going to be significant, and you are going to hear about it." "I appreciate that," she said. The outcome was significant. Glen Hollow Capital issued a formal notice to Croft and Alder Property Group in the third week of November, demanding immediate remediation of the collateral shortfall and full disclosure of the valuation methodology that had produced the numbers in their quarterly reports. The letter was 6 pages long and had been reviewed by 3 separate legal teams. It was not a letter that left a great deal of room for interpretation. Donovan called her that evening. She did not answer. He called again the following morning. She let it go to voicemail. The voicemail said, "Evelyn, I don't know what's happening with the bank, but I think there might be some kind of mistake, and I thought maybe you could. Look, can you call me back? Please." She listened to it twice. Then she deleted it. Her lawyer, a woman named Cortland, who had been recommended by her father's estate attorney, and who had the manner of someone who had seen every variety of human poor judgment and had long since stopped being surprised by any of it, had advised her very clearly that she was not to involve herself in the Croft and Alder matter in any way, which Evelyn had already known and had already been doing. She had no part in the review. She had no part in the outcome. She had recused herself 11 months before the marriage ended and 6 years before any of this became relevant, and the paper trail on that recusal was complete and unambiguous. She was not doing anything to Donovan. The institution was doing what institutions do when the numbers stop adding up. There was a difference. It was important. It was also, she acknowledged privately, somewhat beside the point in terms of outcome. Genevieve Croft called 3 weeks after the initial notice. Evelyn answered this one, because she was curious and because she had made peace with being curious about things that were not her business to fix. "I want you to understand," Genevieve said, without greeting, without preamble, "that whatever you think you're doing—" "I'm not doing anything," Evelyn said. The review was initiated 8 weeks before Donovan asked me to leave, by a colleague who has no knowledge of my personal situation and who was responding to discrepancies in Croft and Alder's own filings. I have been recused from that account since the year before we married. Would you like me to send you the documentation? Silence on the line. The collateral problem, Evelyn continued, is a collateral problem. It was always going to surface. These things tend to, eventually. I'm sorry it's happening at a difficult time for your family, but I genuinely didn't cause it. Another silence. You could make it stop, Genevieve said, quietly this time, something different in her voice now. Not the Ivorblade's version of herself, the actual version. No, Evelyn said, I couldn't. That's not how fiduciary responsibility works. And even if it were, it wouldn't be appropriate for me to try. I think you understand that. She let the silence sit for a moment. Genevieve, she said, I want you to think about what the last 11 years looked like from where I was standing. And then I want you to think about what you would like me to feel obligated to do about this situation. Take your time, she hung up gently. Not with drama, just closed the call and set the phone face down on the table. It was a cold morning in late November. She could see the garden through the balcony door, bare and silvery, the last of the leaves from the oak tree collected against the far fence. She thought she might plant something in the spring, if the landlord would allow it. Nothing dramatic. Herbs, maybe. Parsley. The kind of thing that came back on its own if you gave it enough sun. The Croft and Alder situation moved quickly after that, the way financial reckonings tend to once they have been formally documented. The property portfolio was subjected to independent appraisal. The independent appraisal confirmed what Glen Hollow's internal review had found. 3 consecutive years of inflated valuations, submitted in support of loan renewals that would not have been approved on accurate numbers. The gap between what had been declared and what actually existed was not a rounding error. It was a pattern. Donovan's business partner Alder, whose full name was Gregory Alder, 49 years old, who had been with Donovan since they were both junior agents at a commercial real estate firm in Mississauga, retained his own counsels immediately and began cooperating with the review in ways that were not cooperative to Donovan. That happened sometimes. When there was not enough room for 2 people on the moral high ground, someone always climbed down first. Croft and Alder Property Group filed for creditor protection in February. The filing was public, as these things are. It was covered in the business section of the Globe and Mail in a short article that did not mention Evelyn by name, but did describe Glen Hollow Capital as a trust administrator with long-standing concerns about the company's collateral practices. The article was 4 paragraphs. It was more than enough. Genevieve Croft's family estate, which had co-signed one of the subsidiary loans as a guarantor, was implicated in the proceedings. This was not something Evelyn had known until the filing was public. It meant the consequences were not limited to Donovan and Gregory. They extended to the woman who had stood in an ivory blazer in a kitchen doorway on a Tuesday morning and looked at Evelyn like furniture. Evelyn did not feel triumphant about that. She had not caused it, and she did not celebrate it. She sat with the information the same way she had sat with most of the information over the past several months. Steadily, with a cup of tea, understanding that what had happened was simply the accumulation of choices made over years by people who had believed their choices would not accumulate. She thought about her father again. He had been very fond of a particular phrase. The market does not ask how you feel about the correction. He had meant it about investment cycles. She thought it applied more broadly than that. Petra's necklace turned out to be sapphires. Evelyn had a distant memory of overhearing Donovan describe it to someone on a phone call she was not supposed to hear, one of many phone calls, 7 months ago. The necklace had been purchased at a jeweler in Yorkville. The receipt was in her nightstand drawer. She had kept it for no particular reason, and now she could think of no particular reason to keep it any longer, so she threw it away. She did not think about Petra very much. After that, Petra had believed she was receiving something that was worth having. People made that mistake about Donovan. In March, she went to a dinner party at Agnes's house and met a woman who was a landscape architect and who had very strong opinions about native plantings and soil amendments and why everyone in the city was wrong about hostas. They talked for 2 hours. Evelyn came home and stood in the kitchen and thought that she had not talked like that, freely, easily, without calculating the response. In a very long time. She planted parsley on the balcony in April. She was right. The landlord did not mind. The legal proceedings around Croft and Alder stretched into the summer. Evelyn was not a party to them. She gave a deposition once, a brief and unremarkable account of her recusal and its timing, and then she was finished. The institution handled the rest. That was how it was supposed to work. Gerard updated her informally in June. The full recovery was unlikely. There was a settlement in progress. Donovan and Gregory Alder were personally named in a civil action brought by a secondary creditor. The Croft family estate had retained separate counsel and was attempting to distinguish its position from Donovan's, with limited success. "You're sure you want to keep hearing updates?" Gerard said. He was not a man who asked unnecessary questions, which meant the question was not unnecessary. "I think I've heard enough," Evelyn said. "Good," he said, and went back to his files. She had lunch with her mother that Saturday on a patio in Etobicoke, where they had been having lunch for 30 years. Her mother was 71 and had the kind of quiet dignity that comes not from never having been hurt, but from having decided a long time ago what she would and would not let the hurt determine. "You're different," her mother said, not unkindly. "I think I'm the same," Evelyn said. "I think I was a little lost for a while and now I'm less lost." Her mother considered this. Then she picked up her menu. "The salmon looks good," she said. "It always does," said Evelyn. There was a point, sometime late that summer, when Evelyn was walking back from the office on a Tuesday evening. Another Tuesday, she noticed, which made her think of the first one, the way certain dates collect meaning, whether you want them to or not. And she stopped on the corner of Bay and Bloor, and stood in the warm evening with her bag over her shoulder and the city moving around her. And she understood that she had come through something. Not heroically, not neatly, not without cost, because there had been a great deal of cost, not all of it financial, not all of it visible. 11 years was a long time to have arranged your life around someone, and the rearranging had been slow and not always graceful. And there were mornings still, when she woke up and reached for a phone that would ring and found only the ordinary silence of her own apartment. But she had come through. She had done it, as far as she could tell, without doing anything wrong. She had packed her things and moved out and followed the protocols, and let the institution do its work, and answered questions when she was asked, and not answered questions when she was not. She had not used what she knew to hurt anyone. She had not needed to. What she knew was simply what was true, and the truth had a way of arriving at its own pace, in its own form, without requiring anyone to push it. Her father had also said that once, in a different context, she thought he would have found the application appropriate. She started walking again, west toward the subway, past the coffee shop where she sometimes stopped on her way in, past the bookshop she had been meaning to go back to. The evening light was low and golden the way it gets in August, when the summer has finally stopped trying to prove something and just settles into what it is. She thought she might call Agnes when she got home. She thought she might, eventually, be happy again. Not the same kind of happy she had been before, which she could see now had been partly the happiness of not yet knowing what she was waiting for. A different kind. The kind that comes when you have already been tested and have found, somewhat to your own surprise, that you did not break. The kind that does not need anyone's permission to exist. She walked on. The city continued around her, indifferent and enormous and entirely itself, the way cities are, the way good things tend to be. Present, unasking, reliable as the seasons, not caring in the least whether you noticed them or not, only offering themselves plainly to anyone patient enough to finally look.